Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? The first story comes from the wonderful land of Oz, where aggressive birds are causing cyclists to crash and in extreme cases die. It is now spring in the southern hemisphere, and being spring, many birds are undergoing their mating rituals. In Australia at least, magpies are one of the more aggressive species who will often swoop passers-by to protect their young. These are yet another example of one of the things in Australia that is both dangerous and likely to attack you with little to no reason. The Australian magpie is well known to swoop at anything it perceives to be a threat. This can lead to them striking their target with either claws or beaks, leading to injuries, especially to the head and eyes of those who are unaware. One elderly male has died this year already after a magpie attacked him, and in an effort to avoid the bird, this man ran into a fence and died. You may think to yourself, what harm is there in a magpie? Unfortunately, like most things in Australia, these magpies are unrelated to their smaller cousins in the northern hemisphere. They are very adept at living in urban environments. They nest in large trees and, as has been said, they are aggressive, especially in spring. The magpie itself is a native bird and part of the ecosystem, and has advocates going for it for environmental conservation and simple animal rights reasons. As a result, given its otherwise pleasant nature the rest of the year and purpose, it's not a bad animal. The next creature, however, is yet another one to add to your no list. A recent study examined sea urchins and found they have a mouthful of incredibly sharp teeth. Think of something like the Sarlacc pit and you're beginning to get the right idea. Their teeth are relatively tiny and as a result do not pose much threat to you, unless you are looking through a microscope. They are used to chew into bedrock and coral. The reason they are able to continuously eat into this otherwise very hard surface is very similar to how a knife is sharpened. The outer part of the tooth is made from a material that is slightly less strengthened than the rest of it, and as a result, the abrasion of eating rock results in it being worn away. This keeps the teeth pointed and sharp. In other animal-related news, an interesting investigation of the attempt in Brazil about a year ago to reduce the mosquito population has found genetically modifying them has backfired in a very unexpected way. About 18 months ago, in Jacobino, Brazil, researchers genetically modified mosquitoes so that they would be sterile. This worked initially. Unfortunately, the research was found that 18 months after that initial release of the sterile population, those particular mosquitoes have bred with the wild local mosquitoes and have created hybrids that are resilient to the methods used to make the original mosquitoes sterile. The original attempt came from the spread of significant and serious diseases like Zika, dengue, and malaria. These are diseases that are most easily controlled by controlling the vectors through which they travel. Malaria requires a long-term treatment. Zika and dengue are also hard if not impossible to treat. As a result, preventing them from being passed on to humans is the best method, and, being desperate for an easy solution, sterilization of the mosquito population was the go-to option. The important takeaway from this is twofold. One, the consequences were unexpected, but fortunately have not made the mosquitoes any more dangerous than they were beforehand. Second, it is not yet known how they were able to hybridize so effectively, and if this will have long-term effects on future attempts at genetic modification. The next piece of interesting news takes us back to Australia and something somewhat morbid. Research into the decomposition of bodies has found that a corpse once dead will not necessarily remain where it's meant to be. In particular, research in a body farm in northern Queensland was examining how bodies behave by recording images every 30 minutes during daylight hours. They found that the bodies could move quite significantly in the time it took for the bodies to decompose. One example given was that of an arm moving from down and beside the body to the outside of the body over the course of the recording period. It is currently hypothesized that this could relate to how the bodies decompose, mummify, and dry out. As the ligaments dry out, they may pull on particular structures, leading to them moving even after death. A useful thing to know about if you are exploring unexplained or suspicious death. In tangentially related news, a Florida man's body was found 22 years after it was lost using satellite imagery. The man, known as William Earl Malt, in 1997 left a nightclub and was never seen again. Presumed dead, but his body has not been found until now. The discovery was not made until a keen-eyed resident of the estate spotted an unusual shape on satellite imagery of the estate's pond. What they found was a white sedan, the lost man's vehicle. It also contained the lost man's skeletal remains, which were later identified as belonging to him. Not quite bodies moving on their own, but certainly interesting. Next we have the interesting and unexpected. The United States Navy has accepted footage released to YouTube is that of an unidentified flying object, or as they call it, unidentified flying phenomena. The difference is immaterial, as it's simply a change in terminology. The video was released by a private research group called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, which was founded by Tom DeLonge, who is famous from his time with Blink-182. Not exactly the sort of person you'd expect be producing what is at this stage initially rather groundbreaking outcomes. Now, you may be excited thinking that this means aliens are real, and that the raid on Area 51 will be proof further to this. Unfortunately, that's a little optimistic. The reality is the Navy uses this term simply because it provides the basic necessities of describing what has happened. It's an unknown object that flies. Purpose unknown, nature of object unknown, but we do know it's flying. Simply put, unknown flying object. Based on this, it could really be anything, from Russian spy planes to Chinese planes to anything else in the world and beyond. In a more socially focused piece of research, examination of what happy couples argue about has yielded some unusual and somewhat unexpected results. Happy couples tend to argue about those things that they can resolve with practical solutions. Things like who does the housework and how to spend leisure time. They seem to focus less on issues that were intractable, for example, religion. This means that it's likely that the factors involved in a good relationship might be to focus on those things that can be resolved through action rather than those things that cannot be resolved through action. The study is somewhat limited by its sample size, as it's unlikely that 121 couples are going to completely reflect the gamut of the population at large. Further to this, the group had been split into two subgroups. One of 57 couples in their mid to late 30s with an average marriage of 9 years. The other group had 64 couples, mostly in their mid-70s. They had an average marriage of 42 years. This creates a significant cultural, social, and lifestyle divide between the two groups. There were consistent findings between them as to what they considered the most important issues, generally being intimacy, leisure, household relations, and communication. This is going to be more difficult to extrapolate to both younger and slightly older groups. Building on the earlier GMO study, an explosion at a Russian lab that contained smallpox has created some small amount of panic on the internet. As can be imagined, Russia has all manner of unpleasant and surprising biological samples at its disposal, some with nefarious uses, others there to develop medical applications. Arguably, smallpox is one of the former. The smallpox sample was held at Vector, a state research center for virology and biotechnology in Koltsovo, near Novosibirsk. Novosibirsk is the third most populated city in Russia. Media reporting from Russia says that on the 16th of September, there was a gas explosion which started a fire on the 5th level of the Vector building. It only resulted in a roughly 30 meters squared area that was burnt and one injured person who was taken to hospital. Local news, facility statements, and government statements all support the position that the mishap had no relationship whatsoever to the smallpox virus, ignoring the fact that the fire would have burnt the virus and therefore destroyed it. The reality is that it is a large facility with one small accident. Imagine the outcry if every time there was a small accident in any research facility of any kind that people started tweeting about the hashtag bioweapons. Further to that, the rules that have allowed Vector to hold onto the smallpox samples involve the World Health Organization conducting biannual inspections of their Level 4 facility. Biosafety Level 4 is the highest you can get, and imagine the white jumpsuits, vacuum chambers, and washing in and washing out, and begin to get some idea of what is involved with that level of biosecurity. This one small mishap is unlikely to have released a plague of smallpox across the facility, unlike you would imagine in movies like Resident Evil. Further to that, smallpox is not the only unpleasant surprise they hold, and the conjoined effect of all of these particularly unpleasant diseases, this means that if it had spread, it is unlikely anyone would have been able to report on a successful containment attempt, let alone a failed one. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.